The winter sun filtered gently through the stained glass windows of St. Margaret's Church in Boston, casting soft, rainbow-colored patterns across the stone floor. Sunday service had ended some time ago, and the last of the congregation had already departed, leaving the sanctuary quiet and still. Only one small figure remained behind, a little girl in a bright red coat, sitting quietly on a time-worn wooden bench. 4-year-old Clara Bennett looked up at her mother with wide brown eyes, full of uncertainty and unease. Her mother, Margaret, gave her a gentle smile and brushed her cheek tenderly. "Stay here," she said softly, her voice almost too calm. "God will surely help you." There was a subtle oddness in Margaret's tone that Clara couldn't quite name, but it left a strange feeling in her chest. She noticed her mother's eyes darting around, not quite meeting hers, nervous, evasive. "But Mama," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible, "where are you going? When will you come back?" Margaret didn't respond. Instead, she reached down and took the tiny hand of Lily, Clara's 2-year-old sister, who giggled innocently, her golden curls bouncing as she tugged at her pink coat. At the entrance to the church, Clara's stepfather, Richard, was waiting. The moment Clara caught sight of him, her heart began to pound. He had never once smiled at her. Somehow, even at her age, she understood instinctively that Richard didn't love her. "Hurry up, Liz," Richard called, his voice loud and jarring in the echo of the quiet church. "Let's go." Margaret leaned down, brushing Clara's hair with her fingers. "Be a good girl. God will watch over you." That was when Clara knew something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Usually, after Sunday service, they all walked home together and her mother would make roast beef for dinner. Today was not like those other Sundays, and Clara couldn't understand why. "Mama, I want to go home with you," she pleaded, reaching for the edge of her mother's coat. But Margaret gently pulled away, her hand firm as she said, "Clara, listen to me. Stay here and wait." Then, hand in hand with little Lily, she turned and walked toward the church doors. Clara felt like her legs had turned to stone, rooted to the bench, unable to move. The sunlight through the stained glass had begun to dim, and shadows slowly crept across the pews. At the threshold, Margaret paused and looked back. Her expression was hard to read, part sorrow, part something else. Relief, perhaps? Richard placed his hand on her shoulder, and together, the three of them stepped through the doors and disappeared. Clara couldn't make a sound. She wanted to scream, to run after them, but no words came out. Her throat felt locked tight. She remained frozen, listening to the heavy creak and final thud of the church door as it closed behind them. To her, it sounded like the end of her world. Time dragged on. The ticking of the church's large clock was the only sound breaking the silence. Clara stayed on the bench, just as her mother had told her, waiting. Outside, the daylight gradually faded into twilight. Eventually, Martha Jenkins, the church's caretaker, arrived to clean the sanctuary and was startled to find the little girl still there. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly, "why are you here all by yourself?" Clara remained quiet for a moment, her eyes still fixed on the door. "Mama said she'd come back," she finally answered in a tiny voice. Martha looked around, concern growing on her face. "Where is your mama now?" "Mama and Papa and Lily left. But, they said they'd be back soon." Martha's expression darkened with worry. She quickly called Reverend Samuel, the elderly pastor with warm eyes and a kind smile. He rushed in, concern etched on his weathered face, and gently sat beside Clara. "Hello there, little miss. What's your name?" he asked. "Clara Bennett," she replied, her voice soft but steady. Reverend Samuel offered her a reassuring smile, though the worry didn't leave his eyes. "Clara, did your mama or papa tell you where they were going?" Clara shook her head. "Mama just said, God will surely help you." The Reverend and Martha exchanged a tense glance, then made a call to the local police. When the officers arrived, they crouched down to Clara's level and asked her gentle questions, her parents' names, where she lived, how long ago they'd left. Night had fully fallen by then, but Clara was still sitting quietly on the same bench. A female officer wrapped a soft blanket around her shoulders, trying to offer some warmth. The police had gone to check the Bennetts' home. Most of the furniture was still there, but the closets were empty, and personal belongings had been carefully packed away. It didn't look like a sudden disappearance, it looked like a planned one. Clara's big brown eyes shimmered with tears, but she didn't cry. She believed her mother's words and continued to wait. That night, Clara learned her mother was right, God hadn't abandoned her. Reverend Samuel gave her a warm meal and led her to a small room tucked away in the church, a quiet place where she could sleep safely. As he tucked her in, he said gently, God has led you here, Clara. And we'll take care of you. From that day forward, Clara began a new life within the walls of the church. Her parents and little sister never returned. Not once. The wound left behind in her tiny heart was deep, raw, and confusing. Every morning for weeks, she'd press her face against the cold glass window, waiting, hoping, to see her family walking up the path to take her home. But time moved on. The snow melted, crocuses began to bloom, and still, there was no sign of the Bennetts. Reverend Samuel and his wife, Miriam, welcomed Clara into their home with open arms. They had never had children of their own, and soon they began the legal steps to adopt her. Meanwhile, the police investigation dragged on, but no trace of Margaret or Richard could be found. Authorities believed they had crossed state lines, maybe even changed their names. Why did they leave me behind? Clara would ask herself again and again as she lay alone in her new bed. Her young heart couldn't grasp it. But during the day, she found solace in Reverend Samuel's calm voice and his teachings. God never abandons us, he told her one afternoon, his eyes warm. Sometimes, there are plans we don't understand. But the path is always paved with love. By age 7, Clara had started attending the local elementary school. She was bright, eager, and found a special love for reading. Bible stories in particular captivated her, tales of Moses, Richard, David, figures who had also faced abandonment and hardship. She saw herself in them. Their stories gave her courage. At school, her days were ordinary. She had friends, but she never got too close. There was always a little distance, a quiet wall of protection. She had been hurt once, and she didn't want to be hurt again. But church was different. In Sunday school, she was spirited and full of joy, often teaching the younger children Bible stories with energy and enthusiasm. On her 12th birthday, Reverend Samuel gave her a special gift, a beautifully bound Bible. You have a gift, Clara, he said with a smile. Your words touch hearts. Around that time, she began writing in a journal. She wrote about her thoughts, her faith, and sometimes, she penned imaginary letters to Lily. What would Lily be like now? Would she like Bible stories too? As she grew, Clara started to stand out at school. She won debate competitions and became a quiet leader in her youth group. People were drawn to her presence, her calm conviction, her thoughtful words. But at night, the ghost still came. She'd wake from dreams where her mother was smiling, always smiling, as she walked away with Richard and Lily. Why don't I have a real family? She asked one evening at 16, sitting at the kitchen table with her adoptive parents. Miriam wrapped her in a warm embrace. You do have a family, she said softly. You have us. And you're part of God's family too. But my real parents, Clara's voice cracked. Reverend Samuel took her hand, steady and sure. They made a terrible mistake, he said. But that mistake brought you to us. And God can bring beauty even out of brokenness. Those words settled in her heart like a balm. She began to make peace with her past, and started to dream about her future. After high school, she was accepted into the theology program at Boston University. Her path was clear. She wanted to help others, especially children who felt alone, the way she once had. She shone in college, brilliant, driven, and deeply compassionate. Her professors respected her, and she led Bible study groups while volunteering at a nearby orphanage. You bring light to these children, the director once told her. Still, a small emptiness lingered. Every so often, she would find herself wondering, where were her parents now? Was Lily okay? Could she ever forgive them? At 23, another shift came. Reverend Samuel suffered a stroke. Though he recovered, he was never quite the same. After finishing graduate school, Clara returned to St. Margaret's to serve as a youth pastor, working closely with the man who had raised her. He became her mentor, guiding her as she learned to preach with the same gentle power he had always carried. "Your voice holds something special," he told her once. "It's a gift. Use it for good." Then, at 27, her life changed again. Reverend Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep. Miriam wept, but took comfort in knowing her husband had gone home to heaven. The church overflowed at his funeral. Hundreds came to honor the man who had touched so many lives. That night, Clara returned to the sanctuary. She sat alone on the same wooden bench where, 23 years ago, she had first been left behind. She folded her hands and whispered a quiet prayer. "God, what should I do next?" "I do," she whispered into the stillness. In that quiet moment, it felt as though a veil had been lifted, like a vision had been given to her, clear and undeniable. She understood what her purpose was. The next morning, Clara shared her decision with Miriam. "I'm going to start a new church," she said, her voice steady. "I'll call it the Church of the Light of Hope. It'll be a place for people who've been abandoned, for the brokenhearted. A place of healing." Miriam's eyes glistened. "Samuel would be so proud of you." Clara started with nothing more than a rented warehouse and a fire in her spirit. Her first service was small, just about 20 people gathered in folding chairs, but her words burned bright. She spoke with warmth, conviction, and the deep empathy that only comes from lived pain. Her message was simple, yet powerful: you are never truly alone. No matter how deep the darkness, the light of hope is always shining, waiting to guide you. And people came. Week by week, word spread. Her church grew, not just in numbers, but in spirit. Within 3 years, they moved to a larger building. 5 years after that, the Church of the Light of Hope had branches across the country. Her sermons were broadcast on television, reaching millions. Her book, Hope for the Abandoned, became a bestseller, touching lives far beyond the sanctuary walls. At 34, Clara Bennett was now one of the most influential spiritual voices in America. But beneath the surface of success, a quiet ache still lived in her heart. She had never spoken publicly about her past. Her biography simply said she was the adopted daughter of Reverend Samuel and Miriam Smith. Yet it was that very wound, the ache of being left behind, that had become her power source. Miriam had always stood by her side, offering encouragement and quiet strength. "You're fulfilling a special calling," she often told her. "The day Samuel and I found you, it was part of God's plan." And Clara believed that. She had taken the pain of abandonment and turned it into a lifeline for others. Because she had once waited for someone who never came back, she could speak directly to those who were still waiting, with words that reached where others couldn't. Every Sunday, the large sanctuary overflowed. This Sunday was no different. Over 2,000 people filled the pews, hearts open and eager to hear her speak. High on the walls, bold letters proclaimed the guiding principle of her ministry: let there be light for the abandoned. Clara stepped onto the stage, the room falling into reverent hush. "Thank you for being here with us this morning," she said, her voice gentle but resonant, echoing through the sanctuary. Though she was now 34, Clara carried the ageless grace of someone who had walked through fire and come out shining. Her long chestnut hair curled softly at her shoulders, and her deep brown eyes shone with both warmth and wisdom, eyes that had seen sorrow, but never lost sight of hope. That morning, there was something deeper in her tone. A tremble of emotion, a hidden chord being struck. "In life," she began, "there are partings we never asked for. People we love leave, and we're left wondering why. But sometimes, those partings prepare the way for new beginnings." She stepped down from the pulpit and walked slowly among the congregation. As she often did, she liked being eye to eye with those she spoke to. "Don't let the past chain you," she said. "Don't be held prisoner by pain. If someone has left you, maybe God is leading you somewhere even greater. Her words stirred something deep in the hearts of those listening. Some wept silently. Others bowed their heads in prayer. A few simply reached out, as if to touch the hope in her voice. It wasn't just her eloquence. Her sermons carried the weight of truth, the kind of truth that only grows out of scars. When the service ended, the room stood in a wave of applause. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the presence of her adoptive father. God brings good out of bad situations. She smiled. In the front row sat a young woman with golden curls and tearful eyes, Lily. Clara had found her sister again. Her life had come full circle. The little girl once left behind in a church pew had become a beacon for thousands. And the words whispered to her at the age of 4, "God will surely help you," had come true, in ways more beautiful than she ever could have imagined. She could never have imagined what was about to happen. After the service ended and the sea of believers began to trickle out, Clara stayed behind, exchanging quiet words and warm smiles with those who came seeking comfort, advice, or simply to say thank you. She listened intently to each one, offering them her full attention. This was sacred space for her, even after all these years. That was when Linda Carter, her longtime secretary and one of her earliest supporters, approached her with a peculiar look on her face. "There are some visitors who would like to see you," Linda said cautiously. Clara offered a gentle smile. "Sundays bring all kinds of visitors." "Who is it?" Linda hesitated. "They say, they're family." Clara's smile froze mid-curve. "Family?" she echoed, her voice caught between disbelief and dread. "Yes," Linda nodded slowly. "They said their names are Margaret and Richard Bennett. And, their daughter. Lily." The name struck her like a bell in the silence. Her heartbeat quickened. Her breath grew shallow. In an instant, memories she had carefully sealed away came crashing back. The red coat. The cold bench. Her mother's final words, "God will surely help you." "Where are they?" Clara asked, barely able to get the words out. "I brought them to the small conference room," Linda said gently. "Would you like to see them?" Clara stood frozen for a moment, her thoughts a storm of emotion. Why now? Why here? Her hands trembled at her sides, a mix of anger, fear, sorrow, and something she hadn't expected. Hope. She took a deep breath. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'll meet them." The hallway to the small conference room seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of her. Each step felt like walking back through time, back to that cold Sunday morning nearly 3 decades ago. She could almost feel her small hands clutching the edge of her mother's coat, hear the soft echo of the heavy church door closing behind her. When she opened the door, 3 people stood waiting. A man and woman in their mid-60s. And a younger woman, tall, poised, about her age. Clara's eyes locked first onto the older woman. Margaret. Her mother. Time had left its marks, her hair was now silver, her face lined, but her eyes, clear and blue, were unmistakable. "Clara, it's really you," Margaret said, her voice trembling with emotion. Clara couldn't speak. She just stood there, staring. Richard was beside her. The once commanding figure had softened with age. The sternness she remembered was gone, replaced by something quieter, more uncertain. And Lily, the little sister she hadn't seen since they were children, was now a woman. Composed, elegant, but her eyes gave her away. There was guilt in them. And longing. "We're your family," Margaret stepped forward, her voice tender. "We've come to take you home." Those words were like a match striking dry memory. Clara saw her 4-year-old self sitting on that hard wooden bench, shivering in her red coat. "Stay here. God will surely help you." The heavy door closing. The hours, the days, the years of waiting. "You're my mother," Clara said, her voice breaking. For 30 years, she had replayed this moment in her head, sometimes fueled by anger, other times imagining reconciliation, or simply searching for some sliver of meaning. But none of those imaginings prepared her for the weight of the real thing. "Yes," Margaret said, her face lighting up with a fragile kind of joy. "We finally found you." She reached toward Clara, but Clara instinctively stepped back. "Let's go home," Richard added. His voice didn't carry the coldness she remembered. In fact, it was unsettling how familiar it sounded now. "We've been searching for you, Clara. All this time." Clara felt like the floor beneath her was shifting. Part of her wanted to believe them. Part of her wanted to scream. And part of her just didn't know what to feel anymore. Lily had remained silent up to that point. Now, she looked at Clara with an unreadable expression. Like she was balancing on the edge of speaking, but couldn't quite find the words. "Why?" Clara finally asked, her voice low and filled with restrained hurt. "Why now?" Margaret didn't stop smiling. "It took time. But when I saw you on television, I knew immediately. You're my daughter." 30 years, Clara said, her voice laced with quiet fury. "You didn't look for me for 30 years. "That's not true," Richard said quickly. "There were circumstances. Things we couldn't explain before. We'll tell you everything. Just not here. Can we talk somewhere more private?" Clara hesitated, her mind a whirl of thoughts and half-buried emotions. She wasn't ready. But maybe she never would be. "Fine," she said at last. "We'll talk. At my home." She turned toward the door. That's when Lily finally spoke. "Clara, sister." The word caught her mid-step. "Sister." She paused, her back to them, breathing in the word like it was something foreign and fragile. The relationship, what came next, was no longer a simple question of reunion. It was a reckoning. It was a moment Clara had once dreamed about as a child, but hearing the word sister now stirred something far more complicated. "I'm glad to meet you," Lily said softly. Her voice was quiet, but there was no mistaking the sincerity behind it. Clara met her eyes and, for a fleeting second, saw something strange in them. A warning? A flicker of guilt? Or maybe it was just her own suspicion clouding everything. "Let's go," Clara said, her voice surprisingly calm, though her heart was thrashing beneath her ribs like a trapped bird. Her house, located in a peaceful residential neighborhood about 15 minutes from the church, was modest in size but radiated warmth. Inside, the living room was cozy, decorated with framed Bible verses and small keepsakes gathered from churches Shed visited over the years. It was a home built from years of faith and healing. "Please, have a seat," Clara said, gesturing toward the seating area while keeping her tone even. She looked serene on the outside, but inside, her emotions were churning: confusion, hurt, suspicion, hope. Margaret and Richard settled on the sofa while Lily chose a single chair a little farther away, keeping some space between them. Their eyes wandered around the room, as if trying to piece together the life of the daughter they'd left behind. "What a lovely home," Margaret said politely. "You've done well for yourself." Clara sat down across from them, choosing her words with care. "It's by the grace of God," she replied evenly. An awkward silence followed, thick, heavy, almost impossible to slice through. 30 years stood between them. How do you even begin to cross that kind of distance? Clara folded her hands in her lap and adopted a tone that felt more like a boardroom than a family reunion. "Why now?" she asked quietly. "Why come looking for me after all this time?" Margaret and Richard exchanged a glance. Then Margaret spoke. "We never stopped looking for you," she began. "That day at the church, we came back. But you were gone." Clara's gaze sharpened. "Came back? You left me there." "No," Margaret said quickly, her voice rising slightly. "It wasn't like that. It was a misunderstanding, a terrible one. Lily had a sudden fever, we had to take her to the hospital. I'm sure I told you to wait, that we'd come right back." Clara searched her memory. Her mother's words were still clear, burned into her mind: "God will surely help you." Nothing about a hospital. No mention of coming back. And when we returned, Richard added, you were gone. We called the police. But no one could find you. Clara's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. The police did find me. They even came to your house. But you were gone. Everything was packed. You'd moved. Margaret's face went pale. We were in financial trouble. We had to leave quickly, Richard cut in. We were being hounded by creditors. But Clara, we never stopped searching for you. Something didn't sit right. Their timeline was shaky. Their story, full of holes. Clara's voice lowered. And yet you didn't reach out, not for 30 years. Not until you saw me on television? Margaret looked uncomfortable. We had changed our names. It made things complicated. Lily remained silent, staring out the window like she wasn't even part of the conversation. Clara noticed her detachment. It wasn't just quiet, it was intentional. Like she didn't want to be involved in this at all. Excusing herself, Clara stepped into the kitchen to grab cold drinks. She opened the fridge and paused, resting her hand on the lemonade pitcher. Questions stormed through her mind. Were they telling the truth? Or had they come for another reason? And if they were lying, why now? When she returned, Margaret and Richard were speaking in low voices, but they stopped abruptly as she walked in. She set the tray down. Lemonade, she said. Thank you, dear, Margaret replied with sudden sweetness, her voice sliding into something oddly familiar. Your church is absolutely wonderful. Thousands of followers. I've seen the broadcasts. Yes, Clara said cautiously. We've grown. We have branches around the country. Richard's eyes lit up in a way that made something tighten in Clara's chest. A real success story, he said. You must be financially blessed. It was subtle, but the air shifted. Clara felt her guard rising. Was this about her? Or what she had built? I need to use the bathroom, Lily said quietly. Down the hall, to the left, Clara replied, watching her. As Lily left the room, Margaret leaned in slightly. We can be a family again, she said gently. We need you, Clara. Clara nodded slowly, though she was hardly listening. She was focused on the sound of footsteps, Lily's footsteps. But they didn't head toward the bathroom. They stopped, then turned. Toward her private room. Clara stood up. Excuse me, she said with a tight smile, then walked swiftly down the hall. She opened the door to her study. Lily was standing in front of her desk, frozen mid-reach. What are you doing? Clara asked, her voice cool but sharp. Lily turned around, her expression serious. Her eyes locked onto Clara's. We need to talk, Lily said quietly. Privately. Now. I need to talk to you, Lily said, her voice low and urgent. Just the two of us. Clara hesitated, eyes narrowing in confusion. Still, she stepped back into the study and closed the door behind them. About what? She asked cautiously. Don't believe what they're telling you, Lily said, her voice trembling with intensity. They abandoned you, intentionally. Clara's breath caught. Her heart pounded in her chest. What do you mean? They're not here for you, Lily said quickly. They're here for your name. Your success. Your money. Clara felt the world tilt. You're not Richard's biological daughter, Lily continued. Mom had you with her first husband. He died. She remarried Richard when you were 2. Clara gasped. Her first husband? Lily nodded, her voice heavy. Richard never really wanted to raise you. He didn't see you as his own. When I was born, they decided to leave you, at the church. Clara collapsed into a chair, her knees giving out under the weight of this truth. Everything she thought she'd known, all the confusion, the half-answers, the years of wondering, were suddenly illuminated in a terrible, cruel light. I've always wanted to know about you, Lily said softly, tears rising in her eyes. Since I was little, I heard them talk about the sister they abandoned. At first, they told me you were adopted, but then, when I was older, they told me the truth. Lily looked down, shame written across her face. I've carried guilt my whole life, thinking it was because of me that you were left behind. Clara was speechless. Her mind was racing, but her body felt numb. She could feel pieces of her past sliding into place, clicking together like the final edge of a long unsolved puzzle. They only started looking for you about a year ago, Lily went on. When they saw you on TV, and realized who you were, they thought you might be useful. She paused, her voice catching. They're in debt, Clara. Deep debt. They thought if they could claim you, maybe, they'd get something out of it. Strangely, what Clara felt wasn't rage. It was relief. A strange, bittersweet liberation. Finally, she had answers. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. Lily met her eyes, filled with emotion. Because I don't want to be a part of their lies. I wanted to meet you, not exploit you. I wanted to know my sister, for real. A knock interrupted them. Everything all right in there? Margaret's voice called from the hallway. Clara and Lily exchanged a look, a quiet understanding silently forming between them. We're fine, Mother, Lily answered calmly. Just talking. Clara drew a steadying breath. She had clarity now. She had a choice. She could drown in the pain, or walk forward in truth. Let's go back, she said softly to Lily. I have something I need to say. When the two women returned to the living room, Margaret and Richard were standing with uneasy smiles, faces flickering with forced calm and fragile expectation. Please, sit, Clara said, her tone firmer now, filled with quiet authority. We need to talk. The shift in her voice was unmistakable. Clara had found her center. You came here thinking you could use me, she began. But that plan has failed. Margaret's face drained of color. Richard stiffened. What are you talking about? Margaret asked, trying to sound confused. But her eyes betrayed her. Don't bother, Clara said coolly. Lily told me the truth. You abandoned me deliberately. And now you've returned, not out of love, but for what you think you can gain. Richard turned on Lily, voice rising. What did you say? Though she trembled, Lily stepped forward and stood beside her sister. No more lies, she said firmly. Clara deserves the truth. Clara looked at them both, calm, composed, and unshakable. I could sue you for attempted fraud. But I won't. Their eyes widened in surprise. They had expected outrage, threats, maybe a public scandal, but not this. Why? Richard asked, suspicious. Because I preach healing and forgiveness, Clara replied. And I must live by what I teach. But let this be clear, this is your final warning. Don't ever come near me again. Margaret began to cry. Whether the tears were genuine or not, Clara no longer cared. The past no longer held her prisoner. Please leave, she said firmly, pointing to the door. Without protest, Margaret and Richard slowly stood, defeated. Clara watched them go with calm detachment. Lily lingered, hesitant. Should I go too? She asked, her voice uncertain. Clara studied her. In Lily's eyes, she saw not manipulation, but regret. And hope. That's up to you, Clara said gently. But I'd like to try. If you mean it, really mean it, I want to build something real between us. I do, Lily said quietly. As sisters. But, if you need time, I'll wait. Clara nodded. It will take time. But let's stay in touch. 3 months later, Clara stood before a full congregation, beginning a new sermon series titled What is True Family? For the first time, she shared her story publicly. How she had been left behind in a church at age 4. How Reverend Samuel and Miriam had raised her in love. And how, only recently, she had uncovered the truth about her roots. Family, she told the crowd, is not just about blood. It's the people who show up, who support you, who love you enough to tell you hard truths, and still stay. At the back of the sanctuary, Lily sat quietly, listening. She had started volunteering at the Church of the Light of Hope, slowly building trust with her sister. Their relationship was still delicate, but it was real, and it was growing. As the service ended and the crowd rose to its feet in applause, Clara stood tall beneath the vaulted ceiling. Her father's words came back to her, full of warmth and truth: God brings good out of bad situations. She looked toward Lily and smiled. Her life had come full circle. The little girl once left on a church bench had become a beacon for thousands, and found, in the end, the one thing she had longed for most: a true, living connection. The words her mother had once whispered rang again in her heart. God will surely help you. And somehow, in ways she never could have imagined, they had come true.